afternoon and welcome to you all to this webinar we organize at the Policy Center in partnership with our partners of the Integration Center in the Mediterranean, and we're going to deal with Nexus, education, skills and mobility, and within the cooperation within the Mediterranean area. And that follows up the first webinar we organized in October last. And we were talking about mobility in the Mediterranean basin, and we had a cross study as well as through cross between the points of view and perspectives of the African and European countries. Today, we're going to study the role of mobility through education, a topic which seems very much in the news, especially on the south banks of the Mediterranean. That's the interest of organizing such a webinar on the Nexus education, skills and mobility. And without further ado, I give the floor to Mrs. Giulia Macatini, who is the organizer, the manager in the Mediterranean and l'Arabie Saoudite, who is from the Policy Center from the New South, and to give us an introduction. The floor is yours. Good afternoon to all. Thank you for giving me the floor, and I'm very happy to be with you today, especially to be able to work on this webinar, the joint webinar from the Policy Center of the New South and the Center for Integration in the Mediterranean, especially under UNOPS. This webinar comes within a series of dialogue jointly organized by the CNI and the PCNS around themes which seemed essential to work together, mainly mobility and migration in the Mediterranean. We started this series of webinars last October, and the success of this first one gave us the push to organize a second one, mainly on a specific focus on the link between the essential themes for the development of the Mediterranean, the Nexus, education, skills and mobility. We want to stress the role mobility can play in education for the development of skills, especially the 21st century skills, but not only. For this session we're going to have today, we're very happy also to be working with the partnership of the Agence Française for the Development, which one of them is going to take the floor today. And mobility can be studied in all its forms, physical, knowledge and skills, because we think that it plays a singular role in education. It enables, first of all, to strengthen the quality of education through the integration of new pedagogical methods, cooperation and co-construction or co-building of roads, and it strengthens the development of skills of the 21st century with the students, which are necessary, whatever, in the job world, and they're necessary for the integration and adaptation to the market, to the work market, and to strengthen and to build the skills of the young people as individuals, as well as their opening on the world and others. It is therefore interesting to place in the center the role of mobility and look at it a little bit more closely. So we're very happy to welcome today experts from the Policy Center for the New South, of course, and from the Agence Française pour le Développement, with whom we can have exchanges on this specific theme. Once again, a very big thank to the Policy Center for the New South. We are very happy about this partnership, which is very rich and which augurs well for the future and brings genuine added value on all those questions which seem very important to be dealt with together. And in the name of the CMI, I wish you all a very good seminar and webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Marchesini. I give the floor to Lara Bijaidi from the Policy Center. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon for the Center, for the Mediterranean Center for the Integration and all the resources of the Policy Center, and to all the people who are going to follow this webinar or this seminar, this webinar. Our two institutions decided a few months ago to launch a series of dialogues around what is at stake under mobility and education. And as it was just said, the first webinar gave a cross analysis on those issues in our region, from cross section on the work of the youth, and then crossing all the perspectives, both European and African. This second webinar will enable us all to explore the Nexus education skills mobility, stressing the role of mobility in all its components in education for the development of skills. Why this theme? Maybe not for us who know what we're talking about, but for the participants, we know that there is a huge corpus of literature and very wide studies and developments from here and there with the issues of migration, which is an overall topic. And in this meeting, we considered that mobility and migration could be studied under a specific angle. I mean, the relations between mobility and skills. And this more specific stress is corresponds to our common will, meaning that we want to develop a better understanding of the education and training systems in our various countries, leading to some thoughts on the skills and migration, mobility, and circulation of people in this area. We know that it is quite possible that the future of human migration, because there's going to be a future to human migration and especially migration, especially mobility, is linked to the identification of skills, training, and also to localization, co-localizing and delocalizing, whatever, of the skills, and it will need permanent thoughts to follow the needs of both banks, North and South, in the skills, so that the job market is as inclusive as possible, and at the same time also to think about the skills offered and the training offered to the migrants here and there to add to the existing stock of the assets and also the mobility of those people in the working world. We think it is important to give information on the skills of the workers or the youths which are going to enter the job market, prepare them to take part in this job market, and acknowledging skills can be an important part to support the effects of a regional system of the mobility of of hand workers, of workers in general, and so that it is coordinated and taken into consideration by all stakeholders. We also know that there are various factors which have an influence on the capacities of the countries, whether in the north or in the south, to offer opportunities to strengthen the skills, to their own skills, but also to the migrant populations, even for a country like Morocco, um, within the limits we know. But such exchanges, debates amongst us in this webinar and in the following ones will enable us to know those systems much better, to insert the migrants and citizens in vocational training or in teaching or skills in general. And this webinar, the fruit of our collaboration between our two institutions, and this partnership is set to improve the mobility. And today we can see that in many countries from the North Bank, if we think at what's happening in the Northern Americas and in the links between North and South Americas, and even in such countries like Australia, the skills of the migrant is something very important. The EU is also going in the same direction, spending more time and more interest in the skills and in the aging of this population. I hope there's going to be a better future, and we have to anticipate it and prepare this mobility between both banks, identifying the skills and also realizing that we are in an environment which is changing considerably from the point of view of employment and jobs. And of course, circular migration, temporary migration, and cards for the qualified migrants are the early stages of this reflection. So we have to follow suit, and with our reflection and our work, we have to take part in mobilizing the necessary information and resources to identify the needs and develop partnership skills, and also use our information to kill the hostility of public opinion face of migration in the countries where they live, and also in the countries where they go to when we're talking about full job, full employment, and so on. We want to contribute to this more systemic approach, taking the better part of migration, changing migration in a virtuous circle, and the conclusions of this meeting will give us a set of analyses and points of view on the situation and how we should work and how to develop our partnerships, especially as research and reflection institutions. Thank you to you all for putting forward this theme, and we hope that in the debate we might get a few proposals which are extremely interesting for future meetings. Thank you very much, Professor Jaiti. It is a webinar which follows the first one, organized jointly with our partner last October to explore the frames of the Nexus education, mobility and skills, and to create an opportunity for the countries from both the north and the south banks of the Mediterranean. Now I'm going to give the floor to our panelists and from the center and the policy center, and also from the AFD. So we're going to start with Mr. Alexandre Berton-Dumerger, who is in charge of a project and vocational training with the AFD. And in 15 minutes, he will give us a presentation on vocational training through mobility to develop skills. The floor is yours. Good afternoon to all. I hope you can hear me well. I'm very pleased to be able to share exchanges in this webinar. Thank you to the Policy Center for the New South and also for the integration for the Mediterranean Center to be able to share our thoughts. As you said, I am working for the AFD regarding vocational training, and I'm based in Paris. The AFD, as you may know, is a public bank for development, financing mixed policies in many sectors, especially in vocational training. It is an excellent opportunity for us to be able to share what we have learned from the public debates in many countries on training and how we use mobility within this. So to start with, there are three words which I wanted to stress for my intervention so that you can understand our positions. The first one is vocational training. This is something which you find in the title of this intervention. Now, I want to talk about that as widely as possible because there are also sometimes vocational training which you find in higher education, because sometimes vocational training is centered on initial training. And so there's also another approach, which is a lifelong one, integrating lifelong training. The second key word of this intervention is, of course, mobility. And you've already mentioned that in your introduction. In the dialogue we have with various countries, we want to see mobility, social and professional one, as well as geographical one. But as AFD, the finances come from the countries, but we also want to participate and contribute to a regional reflection, which is supported by regional organizations. This point is very important for us. And the third word is development of skills. And it is true that through this expression of development of skills, it broadens the opening, because we're not just concentrating on training centers and institutions. It develops everywhere, in fact. And here, what you can see is was deliberate. It is taken outside in the street, in the market. So sometimes I'm going to go away from the Mediterranean area because very often skills develop outside the training centers mainly. And what is important is acknowledgement of the skills, and that has to be developed as well, especially outside the training centers. And this explains our more global and wider approach, which seems very important to us. So going back to professional and social mobility, what we share with all the organizations and NGOs and all the people we're working with is to extend the opportunities. I was happy to hear that word, that opportunity word. So extend the opportunities to have access to training, a lifelong training for insertion, improving. This is lifelong, and also, especially in today's environment, changing jobs and people who have to follow new trainings to discover new opportunities, new skills, and so on. So how do we go about that? It's not our task, it is the countries which do that. The first entry is the more classical, the traditional one. The government, the Moroccan government policy is a reference. It means developing training centers which are close to the job work. It is not automatically obvious. It's a partnership between the private and the public sector, and giving technical and the skills and for the economy, and the sectorial centers, the delegate managing centers, which are delegated to the private sector, enables the young people to have access to that, and they can get important jobs in this sector. The second one is an entry in a different way, going in the centers through businesses which develop skills, and they're going to bring them closer to the training centers. And so that means practice, which is something which is offered to young people who sometimes left the school system, and it means consolidating informal professional learning and strengthening all that through the development of training in both ways. The third one is for people who are sometimes very far from social mobility, and we have to support them through roads which are going to lead them to learning and then professional entry in the world. So here you can see somebody supporting a young people, and we have to find as ministers, collectivities, NGOs, and also use the funds dedicated to professional training. So I'm going to give you an example for each one. The sectorial centers, which you have several financing. There's a new one for the creation in new sectors, such as the pharmaceutical sector. And those are a lot of opportunities for young people. The second one is more for the people who are sometimes far away from any opportunities of social mobility. It is what we knew in Tunisia, which is a device for the new opportunities. It's through the Institut Européen de Coopération and Développement, and which is called the MED-NC network. And then the third one is an example coming from Charge, which is a financing which enables to consolidate informal learning outside the training centers in the small companies, even the smallest ones, and also the development of both opportunities to learn. And this is something we put in all the dialogues. How can financing answer the issue of social link and social mobility? When we're talking about geographical mobility, and when we could talk about financing that they affect the countries, and when we work on the countries, there's mobility within the country itself and in the territories, and that's something which is very important. But also through regional organizations. One of the example is very rich in learning, and this is the one supported by the European Commission, which developed a program for mobility following the Maastricht Treaty, and for which the countries decided on the common policy on vocational training. And it initiated a program which is Leonardo da Vinci, which is included in Erasmus Plus, but originally the interest was that it was centered mainly on stakes and project on vocational training and mobility in professional training. And here you have a few examples of the second phase of this program. And it is stressed that mobility were very efficient leverages, and even for those who had more difficulties did not really have access to such mobility programs in the various countries. And this evaluation stresses the importance of this mobility, both for the institutions, for the exchanges it created, for the teachers and the trainers who managed to exchange, and also for the people who developed professional capacities, but also linguistic skills, and developed a sort of European identity through this mobility. At the time, it was even more interesting for us, as today we are in a situation such as the Indian Ocean, the Union for the Mediterranean, various other organizational, regional organizations, which are working on the development and the common development of vocational training. And that was developed in territories as well, which is something which is very important, and we support that strongly with the various countries when we're talking about agricultural and rural training, because there it is very important to stress territories and also the territorial management of skills and offering opportunities of mobility opportunities in various territories such as Polynesia. The three examples, you have the mobility at in the territory, and there we have a network for the FAR network, which is for the African countries, and it is for agricultural and rural, and its aim is to get an expertise network, and this is linked to mobility within the territories. The second example, in terms of geographical mobilities, the support we gave to the Commission of the Indian Ocean, and the mandate given from the Council of Ministers was to work on a program of regional cooperation, including, just like Leonardo and Erasmus, including a mobility on vocational training within the Indian Oceans. So meetings were organized in the same way as this webinar today. And it brought together all the stakeholders of this area around the strategic pole on the 23rd of February last year. And the mandate was to follow this job and to design a mobility program regionally centered, focusing on vocational training. And this is something we insisted on very strongly. Regional mobility, but also social and professional mobility, especially in countries such as Madagascar, where informal vocational training is very strong. And the first modality of skills capacity building. And another example I wanted to present is a device which is just being worked on with the International Center of Training with ITC ILO with in Turin, which works with Morocco, Ivory Coast, Burkina, several countries working together to design together a system which will enable to promote such mobility, whether social or also geographical, through an acknowledgement system, through a system acknowledging the skills. And we want to design a systemic approach to give a system which explains how we can acknowledge skills, how can we steer and or orientate such skills. And so this is a designing tool for a country, for a region, which is going to be initiated in the very near future. So this is going to be a tool which is going to be useful for the skill, for capacity building and promoting the social and geographical development and mobility. So you notice that there's a word which I did not use, which is education, because it's not to put education on the side, but we all know how the education systems need opportunities for many young people who are in situation after secondary or higher education where they have to find decent jobs. I did not mention it here because I wanted to stress the system of employment and training. So this, I think, is the first point which needs to be strengthened for the education system to find answers to the needs of many young people. The last point is, of course, acknowledgement, on which I wanted to focus a little bit, because it is very important in mobility, and all those elements have to focus on the reflection beyond the word nexus. Has to be found through acknowledgement, which means knowing and also acknowledging. This is something which is very important. If you want to know a little bit more, I'm there to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Alexandre Berton-Dumanger, for all the efforts and your contribution. Now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Who works, Mr. de Martin, who works, who is going to talk about studying abroad, training periods, and policy of migration and skills. The floor is yours, Mr. Martin. Thank you very much, Abdel-Salam. Thank you to the Policy Center and also to the CMI for organizing this webinar. And I'm here to talk about Nexus education, skills and mobility between Europe and Northern Africa. And there are two questions which seem at the center of this nexus: studying abroad and training abroad as well. I'm going to ask a few questions which are provoking. Is it a return ticket or is it just a single ticket? There's an article on which I'm working, and I want a normative approach on the migration policies and also the trainings of the countries of the Maghreb. I'm starting from two premises, from two statements. Then you have in the European Union, there was something set up in 2020, and they're talking about seasonal workers, and that has been existing for a long time. The growing facilitation of the migration in the job market, and then the new partnerships in migration of skills. I mean, but the European Commission stresses a little bit more the partnerships intended to attract talents, and the presentations which was given by the European Commission will contribute to palliate what is lacking in Europe, using people from the third countries. And it is certainly true that this initiative concerns directly the EU in France, in Germany, and in other member countries. There are other offers for legal work, but in most cases, the objective is similar. It is facing the seasonal needs for people to work and integrate 7 million foreign workers in the job markets and train the potential migrants to qualify them for the EU. The second statement is that in the countries of the Maghreb, particularly, in certain sectors, maybe not everywhere, but in certain sectors, there's a clear and genuine issue, which is the evasion of brains, which means that the skills which are necessary for the development of those countries flee elsewhere. And there are a lot of evidences, and it is an issue which is more and more central even in the development policies of the countries. From those two statements, we have a new corollary, which is that these countries, especially Tunisia and Morocco, but also Algeria, need national policy in skills and migration. And for the time being, there's no such thing. It's true that in Tunisia, we developed a national policy for employment internationally and migrants within the TOM project, but that hasn't been approved yet. And it only weakly touches on migration and skills. And even within the TOMS project, we're just starting the work on an analysis of the impact of migration, job migration, on the national job market. So we are in the very beginning. In Morocco in 2014, there was a national strategy which was approved with a program and a specific objective on the mobilization of skills of the Moroccans in the world. And this issue has been picked up by the new report on the development, which was published last year, and which means that Moroccans throughout the world contributes to the development and the changing of the world. But it's not exaggerated to state that it is just an initiation and not yet operational. And so the needs for a national strategy on such migration skills is very important. And I'm thinking of the Nexus, education, skills and mobility, on the focus of such two elements of this strategy, amongst others, of course. And if the foreign students and the training spaces, we were talking about foreign students from the latest data from UNESCO. Morocco has 5% of its population student education, student from higher education. So it means 7,000 foreign students, 30,000 in France, and the second country was Ukraine with almost 6,000 students, and Germany with 4,000. And so such are the statistics, which are probably underestimated the actual number of students abroad. And Morocco has 24,000 foreign students, all coming, or almost all coming, from sub-Saharan Africa. Algeria with 31,000 students abroad, I mean, namely 2%, 24,000 is a white majority in France, and welcomes 8,500 foreign students from sub-Saharan Africa, while Tunisian has 24,000 students abroad. It means more than 9% of the population of students, and France with almost 10,000 students, Germany with more than 6,000 students. Are top of the ranking. Altogether, 40,000 students in Europe, or African students in the Maghreb countries. That it is quite a number, but it is an important number in those countries, and the development of those countries is very important and justifies a migratory policy regarding those students. I will talk about that later. As regards this training opportunities, which are a tool for the training internationally to face the inadequation of skills as compared to the needs of the job market. Personal experience helps me here, because I had to work in an association in economic students, and we needed international spaces. which was its essential activity, but we don't have that in here, and well, those students cannot go to the businesses. This is also linked to the tax opportunities, and so it misses the steps there and the social ladder, which was mentioned by the previous speaker. This is something which is lacking in our countries. So there's a need to create a system which helps them and implements training sessions, capacity buildings of the students to access the job markets. In Europe, it is the opposite. The training spaces have become a tool, I would say, something which has to be counted on in the training road for the job market. And that can also be seen in the steering project of legal migration implemented by the EU in the partner countries of the African countries, for instance, which concern precisely the organization of training sessions or preparations, and also the development of the institutional framework and partnership, the projects Omer towards France, Mentor to Italy, Palim to Belgium, or also young generations to Spain to study for master degrees. All those programs include selection of the beneficiaries, which is training sessions and employment, including migration and very often final migration, and also strengthening the evasion of brains and the brain to rather than having capacity building between the various training sessions. And this is very interesting that today I think there's no specific follow-up which enables to assess the contributions to the development of human capital in the various countries of such programs, of that steering programs on migration. And that leads me to my last part, the conclusions. The normative conclusions. I consider that the previous analysis shows clearly, first, the needs of a supporting strategy to circular mobility with selections and incitements for the beneficiaries, as well as for training sessions, as well as for students. There's a very interesting experience which has to be assessed. It is in Ecuador, in Latin America, allocating grants for 10,000 to 10,000 students since 2016 with some money which has to be assessed as to the contribution to the national capital. And the second point is the needs for better knowledge which of the relation between migration, mobility and skills. And recently I analyzed the agenda of research the skills in Morocco, and I identified 11 points on the links between migration and mobility and skills, on the components of the qualification of migratory flow, and also brain evasion, and also the participation of skills and capacities in the various sectors of economy, the qualification of those migrants who came back, and the qualifications in the job markets nationally and internationally, and the development of a system, of an information system on work. There are signals for a development system. The third element, which seems important, is necessary for negotiation within the EU, so that which includes mobility, migration as such, meeting the objectives of the EU, but also capacity buildings nationally. And the previous intervention of the AF development shows that, and also trying to identify conclusively the evasion of brains and also the conclusions of what is being experimented with Africa. And my fourth conclusion is that the strategies, I'm going to go back on the fifth one, has to be national, but also there must be an African strategy, because more and more the countries of the northern part of Africa are linked not only to Europe, but also to the other African countries. We saw that with the number of students from sub-Saharan Africa, with Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, 7 million of them. And therefore, that requires nationally in the Maghreb countries, migration policy to integrate such students. And it is almost impossible legally. And the fifth and penultimate conclusion, the needs, started with that. We cover all the migrations, all the cycles, diaspora and return to the initial nation, and also with the issue of migration of work in the national strategy for work and vocational training. And from what we can see today is not exactly the case. And there must be an institutional framework with a substantive budget to be able to face the implementation of strategy. And finally, and I connected that to all the elements already stressed by my colleagues, and there's a regional approach for the working market. It doesn't mean that we have frameworks which are purely national, but maybe we also need a different approach, and that doesn't. This region doesn't exist as such, and it does exist in various fields through the EU, and the countries do not seem to be ready from the other side. They cannot renounce their exclusive skills on foreign workers. And we have to move towards a regional framework to find or strengthen the nexus between education and training, vocational training. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ivan Martin, for this presentation on migration and skills in the countries of origin. You stressed the necessity to elaborate policies and why not decide on the regional framework, whether in the Maghreb countries or in the Mediterranean countries. And so can you give us a presentation on very important countries, the importance of countries, the importance of skills with young people? Mrs. Marchesini, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. To give me the floor again. Can you see my screen? No, so thank you very much. The presentation comes at the right time because the two previous presentations started to go deeper into the links between the three themes which we wanted to put forward. And here I want to present you what we have studied at the Center for the Integration in the Mediterranean, on the level of higher education, especially internationalization, and how it is a tool to improve the skills, the 21st century skills for young people. First of all, what is internationalization of higher education and why is it important? And why do we think it is important to concentrate on that in the Mediterranean? There you have the definition, which has been debated. And this is the result of a very important debate. And I think it is important to stress that and take 2 or 3 words to talk about it. Internationalization should be understood as the intentional process of integrating an international, intercultural, and global dimension in the purpose, role, and delivery of post-secondary education in order to enhance the quality of education itself and also to have an impact on the well-being of society in general. In this way, the ultimate benefit of internationalization is to learn from the world and not just teach the world as it is. So there's a link which is a dual one. It's in its report to knowledge, students are not just there to learn, but it is an exchange, a mutual exchange, and it links education, the quality of education, the skills, and mobility. And we're going to see why. In fact, internationalization, and Mr. Martin stressed a very important aspect of internationalization, which is mobility for students. And you gave us a lot of figures for the Maghreb countries of this mobility. And this is something which encompasses other dimensions as well, such as something which is very important as well, but there are many others. And very often we forget them and we forget that they participate of the same objective, the same purpose. And we're talking about double or joint degrees, internationalization of curriculums, and virtual exchange, the campuses, and academic partnerships, and internationalization of research. So in fact, it doesn't mean very often we focus on physical mobility of the students or professors, but in fact, we understand internationalization as mobility of knowledge in its wider understanding. And so we can have, we can reach people, students and young people in general. And before moving to that, why do we think that internationalization is important in this area? Because it has many benefits. The first one is the improvement in education quality, because exchanges with peers, teaching methods which are different, and the introduction of common standards, learning of foreign languages, and everything which is which evolves around exchanges improves education quality in general. And in the Mediterranean country, this is something where we still need to work on when we consider an overall view. And of course, there are many other things which increase the influence on the international scene and establishing closer ties with various countries which accept to exchange knowledge. One of the advantages which is very important here, and I think we have to stress that especially in this area, it is that internationalization enhances the capacity of the 21st century skills for students, and they are very important for employability of those young people. And as regards the tertiary education, it is internationalization is the vector which has to be put forward because it enables whatever we do, whether we are in chemical courses, curriculum or literature or engineering, we also need to develop those 21st century skills, critical mind, the capacity to adopt, possibility to do teamwork, open the brains and the spirits and so on. They go well beyond knowledge as such. And through that, we can interact and seize the opportunities. And it was mentioned before in the intervention of the representative of AFD, we realize how important they are. So we have to seize such opportunities. And to do that, the 21st century skills are essential. And they also increase the employment perspectives, because then we can actually seize such opportunities and also answer the job offers and start an adventure in a new enterprise. In the MENA area, we know that unemployment is the highest rate in the world, and it is about 26% for young people, according to the World Bank. So there's a real need to improve the quality and the relevance of higher education. And therefore, we think it is essential to work on such topics. Then I would also like to stress the role played by internationalization at home in this process. What is it? It is one way to implement internationalization without having to physically move, and the pedagogical importance and show the advantage of potentially interest a certain number, a wider number of students than today, because today we're just between 2 to 3% of the students who take advantage of such opportunities to study abroad. But, and as was mentioned before, this is, of course, something which is good for the elites, because those who do not have the same opportunities and the same amount of money find it difficult to finance such an experience abroad, which is very good for their training and very useful for the future. But I would also, before moving on, with following this thread, showing how important it is and why we should concentrate on it and review it today. It is also see where the MENA area stands when we're talking about internationalization. So the CMI and the World Bank published in 2020 the first analytical report on internationalization in this area. And we see that the region, the MENA region, is faced with very weak attractivity. And such a poll taken in 2019 shows that the MENA region is the region which is not a priority for the institutions themselves to develop partnerships, internet partnerships for internationalization. It prefers to develop partnerships with other areas. So we can see that we are faced with a weak attractivity today. And if we go a little bit more into details, we can see that where the students go, and I'm going to show you the situation using the flows of students, inbound and outbound students. And there again, we see physical mobility as a proxy to show where internationalization stands, but it's just for analysis purposes and to find the data. But we have to keep in mind that it is not the only way to do so. So the mobility rate of students entering the area is higher than the world average, which is around 3.1 compared to 2.4 in the world. But if we go more into details, we realize that the statistical spreading is different according to the sub-regions. The Gulf countries, especially Qatar and the Arab Emirates, pushing this figure up because they have extremely high inbound rates, while most other countries have much lower inbound rates. Nevertheless, mobility, inbound mobility is increasing regularly, and through the decade has been so through the decade prior to COVID. So we do not have the actual figures yet. So foreign enrollments grew and are still growing in a more faster than the domestic enrollment in almost all the MENA countries. And that shows that there is an interest, and the influence of internationalization is can be felt strongly in this region as well. Now we can see where those students go. Where do they come? And we can see the origin. More than half come from Northern Africa and the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's almost 1/3. Then Morocco, the interests of the countries is different. Morocco attracts mainly West African students, Jordan particularly, the Middle East and the Gulf countries. That's what you can see here. Now we can try to see the other side of the outbound student mobility, those who leave their countries to go and study elsewhere. Now we can see straight away that outbound mobility in the area represents approximately twice the global mobility. So the rates are not exactly the same. Gulf countries have higher outbound rates. Egypt, Iran, and Algeria were lower than 2%. And the red line is the world average. So there we can see, if we analyze outbound student mobility in the countries and outside the countries, and that comforts what we saw before. The weak rate of attractivity, the most students decide to leave the area to go and study further away. And that's what was suggested by the poll of the of 2019. So where do they go from this MENA region? Most North African countries from the Maghreb, and that's what Mr. Martin used to say. The Maghreb students mainly go to France, or at least in French-speaking countries, while Middle Eastern and Gulf students mainly go to English-speaking countries or Gulf countries. So this gives you a photo more or less of where we stand. And once again, we use the data of the students on their physical mobility, but we understand that for this region, maybe the approach to catch up with this and not lag behind should be different. So when we concluded this report, we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and we looked at, we delayed the publishing, because it changed quite a lot in the data, and we realized that the universities, just like everybody else, had to adapt in their strategies to attract international students, and also to welcome them. So from one day to another, they had to send the students back, or at least take measures, security measures, which were quite new, and or at least stop. Many of them carried on and carries on with internalization, because it is essential for the quality of education itself, and that is everywhere in the world. So, of course, the countries which very much forward did not want to keep this, to abandon this tool, because of the feedback, which is very important on the quality they delivered home. So they had to explore all the other ways of internalization apart from physical mobility. And this is where we understand that internalization at home, which is defined here, was defined in 2015 by Eden and Jones, and it concerns the integrating and internalization dimension in culture, in the curricula of the students within domestic learning, where there's no necessity to leave the country or the university physically, but simply to get connected to other students from other universities, to have such an exchange. So obviously, digitalization is something which is instrumental to internalization at home, but it doesn't mean internalization. Of course, the vehicle is digitalization, the possibilities to do what we do today, a webinar, where everybody's at home but talks together. But we also need an exchange and co-construction of programs, not only get connected. That doesn't mean automatically that it is internalization. To have that, we have to actually get your hands in the job and open to new pedagogical methods, learn the language of the other, learn the translation system of the others, to be able to understand each other. And so that domestic internalization has advantages which are quite important. The fact is, of course, that just like normal one, you gain skills, you improve the employability of the young people, with the 21st century skills, and it facilitates, it is relatively more easy and less costly to implement that. So for people of Northern Africa or other countries, it could be easier to catch up with the internalization, which is less costly, and especially in what is very interesting, it could reach a wider number of students, because potentially it could affect 100% of the students, or at least a big number of them, because it could be a module added to any type of training and teaching. So we inside such countries, we try to push such countries to focus on such domestic internalization, because it's an opportunity to catch up with and get the benefits and reap the benefits of that, which were mentioned earlier. So now today, how can we do all that? And in fact, first of all, we should try to stress this theme, because it has to become a priority. So today, internalization, maybe because of the name itself, which I think is not very explicit of what is in the background, internalization is not a priority for such countries, not in higher education. There are other problematics, but I think this is something we have to try and do some lobbying to make people understand the benefits they can reap from all that. And because those countries really lag behind, and we have to focus on the segment of mobility of knowledge through internalization at home, with collaboration online, exchange online, and so on. This is something which is essential, and that's the message we wanted to deliver in this report, which you can find in English, in French, and in Arabic. And you have the link here. And this enables me to put an end to my presentation here and come back to that in higher education, and how we think that higher education can be important to set this regional dynamic. And as we heard before, is on vocational training of others. So this is a whole in post-secondary education in this area, and a link with Africa and Europe. There's quite a lot to be done on this theme, where mobility has a role to play and can bring answers to all that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marchesini. It was a very interesting intervention. It's very important to understand the importance of internationalization. Thanks to exchange programs, and also to understand, as you have noted, the different possibilities. The region has offered different opportunities. You spoke about internationalization at home to increase knowledge. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Jaidi, who will present a subject, a classical subject, which is still ongoing. So the partnership and the different challenges. Professor Jaidi, you have the floor. Yes, I'm trying to find my presentation. I need to share my screen, is that right? Right, let's see if this works. Could you assist me with this, please? Do I have to share my screen? Is that it? I'm not really sure. Because usually this is how it works. Is there someone who might be able to help me maybe? You have the share screen? Yes. And then you have to choose the window you would like to share, where the presentation is, and you share that again. The problem is I don't have any windows to share. Oh, yes, there's something. Yes, we see your emails though. You have to open the presentation, and once it's open, you have to look for it using the arrow. Perfect. Yes, you're right. I had to open it beforehand. Yeah, sometimes it happens. Perfect. Can you see my presentation? No. No, not really. Oh, it's open. No, now you have to go on Zoom and you have to share your screen on Zoom. You just have to choose the screen with your presentation. Oh, there it is. There it goes. Oh, we managed. Right. So what I'm trying to present in this introduction to the discussion is a reflection on where we are at in Morocco, on the evolution and the strategies on vocational training, and the perspectives and of the economic dynamic in Morocco, the setting up of a green economy. We understand that there are difficult choices, and therefore we have this roadmap, and we keep in mind the dysfunctions when it comes to professional training, the challenges, and to understand, to underline new approaches in strategies and also new approaches in green jobs, and on the other side, the territorial mobility, geographical mobility in the world of training. I think that this presentation is linked to this reflection which we have started the past last months on the center on the labor market on training. The observation which is being done in Morocco and everywhere. So the labor market is currently transforming itself. It's very clear. We're going towards the development of services and new profiles when it comes to new jobs when it comes to technology and competences which are more linked to different sectors, which we'll see soon. What we have been seeing in Morocco is not everyone has the right competences for the new jobs or the future jobs. And so we need to understand how we can have training in place which answers these needs. Following the discussion we have had within the National Commission, we have had this collective discussion. So here I'm going to present these points as well as my personal input. We shared the idea that today employability and the production of adequate competences is the biggest challenge when it comes to training and jobs. In Morocco, we are trying to work on the adequate competences in order to answer to the needs of the labor market, especially when it comes to behavior, managerial and entrepreneurial competences to prepare the individuals to the needs of the labor market. There's a collaboration needed amongst different stakeholders, which would be pertinent in this case. This strategy, which will look at sectorial and territorial issues, and when we look at the situation in Morocco, the level of training, and we see those workers who are in labor market, those who are unemployed. Here we have the numbers, and we have those part of the labor market who have a diploma, who have training, and all this is linked to the teaching system. When it comes to unemployment, employment touches an important part of those who have a degree, and more particularly those who are part of professional vocational training. So you can see the numbers on the screen. From this reality, we have another key element which is important, which has been established on the evolution of labor market in Morocco. We have in Morocco a high level of brain drain, so high level individuals who are leaving the country, and we're talking about 18.6% of all university graduates who are working elsewhere, not in Morocco. And what is even more worrying is when we look at opportunities and their preferences, we can see that those who want to leave the country are quite high, irrelevant of the age groups. So it looks as if the insertion in the national labor market is blocked and there's no possibility and opportunities. For which reason? Is it because there's a better quality of life elsewhere? We see, of course, that it's a better quality of life, which is important. And the perception of youth, people who are unemployed. Another issue is that the system of teaching is very far from the needs of the labor market. So this is something which we need to look into. When we look at low economy art, we have very high levels of graduates who are unemployed. And then when it comes to engineering, commerce, we have a weaker level of unemployment when it comes to graduates, and access to the market is easier.
The other aspect beyond this is vocational training, which in Morocco, beyond the various reforms we saw over the last 10 or 20 years, so a good progression in its content as well as in the attractivity and also the insertion of young people. The enrollment is high all the time, and the offer is very varied with the various sectors, branches, but the satisfaction is rather low. But even if there's an improvement, we notice that the various students are more or less in 3 different branches, and less than half of them are happy. So if we look at both components of the training, whether we're talking about higher education or vocational training, we can see that for higher education, there's a certain amount of constraints is facing various constraints depending on the quality of education, massification, but also the quality of the pedagogical content and the curricula, and also there's an issue of governance, because whatever the development we can see in decentralization, devolution of the university is not real devolution, because they're not really free when it comes to the quality and the program. It's more or less a devolution of the structure itself, rather than the capacity of the academics to have a certain autonomy and reactivity according to their localization. The private sector is still not really developed in higher education, more than less than 5%. We're very far from the 20% target announced 10 or 15 years ago, and access to information for the parents or the students themselves who are not really informed. We're talking about vocational training, and we can see that there's a certain amount of dysfunctioning, limiting the capacity to meet the needs of the job market. It deals with the legal framework, but also with the various components of vocational training and primary and secondary and higher education, and also the steering qualification, which is rather deficient because it depends on various centers of decision, the ministries and other offices. There's a lack of general cohesion, limiting the use of resources, which are important and affected to such branches. And vocational training doesn't have a lot of value in the eyes of the population, and it doesn't follow the evolution of the job market. And taking those dysfunctionings into consideration, the Commission stressed the strategic guidelines for a better approach of a new system, more in adequation with the job market. And we have 9 different guidelines, and I will stress the most important ones: the quality, of course, which is considered as a priority objective to be developed, and of course strengthening the role of the private sector, which can be in better adequation with the needs of the job market, and also the better qualifying training, supporting learning during the whole life, lifelong learning, because it is very important because entrance and leaving the job market, and also the mechanism, which are rather with intermediation, can have a different approach to the needs, and also strengthening access of women to the job market, because this is very important. And what was said by Ivan earlier is the possibility to attract the Moroccan skills in the world, and at the same time open the job market to international skills, whether from the south or from the north. Another one which seems to be important for me, it's leveling the legal framework and regulations to promote employment, and also the issue of governance, which is a very serious handicap. And all this means that we need to put in place the follow-up, and also taking all this into account. There's a priority. I'm not talking about human capital, but about strategic decisions for the development of Morocco. The green growth was a theme which caused a lot of reflections of the sectorial guidelines and what it meant for the training system. And we mean that this green growth, can reduce inequality and improve human well-being, but also meet environmental stakes and climatic changes, because since the COP in Marrakesh, Morocco has been involved quite a lot. And green economy does not only mean the creation of new jobs, which are green jobs, but also it has an impact on traditional jobs as well, because we are in a logic of decarbonization, and we are also energy efficient, and all the traditional jobs have to be taken into consideration as well in the training, so that they fall within the green economy. So the skills are at the heart of this theme and issue, and those green jobs have to be have to master everything, and the training can be developed to go along those lines. The sectors which were considered as priority sectors for the creation of green jobs, there are 8 sectors, which some of them are cross jobs, such as energy, renewable energy and water and so on. But there are more vertical sectors, such as renewable energy, agricultural, and also the green spaces, the ecological spaces, ecotourism, and all those sectors have been identified in the public debate, as well as through studies led by various institutions and national organized organs on the perspective of jobs. And we establish a roadmap and on training, and with the various sectorial studies and sectorial studies to be developed, especially in environment, pharmaceutical industry and parapharmaceutical area. But the most important dimension, which was kept in those strategic orientations and green energy and profiles, which were in adequation with the economic sectors of Morocco. It's to involve the regions and towns and cities and so on. Today we are in the middle of a reflection on how to build capacities for the regions, so that they can deal with vocational training. So it means in which field can they get involved, and on the skills negotiated with the state, on skills to be transferred. later on with the capacity building of the various regions which can deal with which can actually deal with all that. And this issue deals with decentralization, and it can be the entrance to a better approach to the governance of vocational training, and that can be better. And so we can involve local actors, and this is important, that we also have to see how the various agencies, ministry and organizations can take can adopt those vocational training and not stay in centrality and in the ministries such as Rabat. And so that involves the territories and the region. So we had to create a certain cities of skills in the 12 countries of Morocco, and that they work according to the generic resources, and could be more generic and competitive. 12 cities of competence, and together with the 30,000 pedagogical openings with the ministries and other stakeholders beyond the ministries, such as the Hassan II Fund for the Development and so on. This is the mapping which was established with the various skill profiles and trainings in the 12 areas. I'm not going to deal with all that and explain the various aspects, but interested to see that the will to adapt training to employment and give the capacity of intervention in the various regions. So there are identifications of the opportunities offered for each field and sectors at the various levels of the regions in training, employability, and business. And an important effort has already been made to analyze the development, analyze the perspectives of such areas in perspectives, territorial perspective, which are the institutions which exist, which are the stakeholders which could be mobilized, and of course, how can we deal with the financing and the support to this training. So this is the overall frame, and I think that we can think about everything today between the link between the vocational training, green economy, and profile and involvement of the territories in this new dynamic. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chaidi, for this intervention. You really analyze the characteristic of further education as well as vocational trainings and system, and education, higher education seems far away from the job market, which explains why people who studied move away. But within the profile presented, there's a need for an approach of development, and green growth is very important because it can put forward the creation of new jobs, but also involve traditional jobs and involving the local stakeholders and the devolution in general, and deconcentration as has started in 2015. I'm going to give the floor to the participants to see if they have questions they would like to ask the panelists, or also comments to be made, and they can share with our panelists. At this time, you cannot be heard. So you cannot hear me. Would like to thank Professor Jaidi for its intervention. We heard that, I think. And so I'm going to give the floor to the participants for questions or comments to be made, and they would like to share with us. I think that Ramadan has effects except on the panelists. So now we're going to conclude. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes each to conclude and give your recommendations. I'm going to start with Mr. Alexandre Berton Dumurgier to give us his conclusions and recommendations, if he has any. Thank you. Of course, it's not a conclusion from me because there's a hope to contribute and participate in exchanges on the essential points you're thinking about. And I was very attentive to what was presented when we're talking about Moroccan public policy in terms of territories, ecosystem. So that goes beyond your reflections. And thank you very much to giving me the opportunity to participate like that. Thank you very much. I shared our experience as a development bank about our reflection on vocational training. So I hope, and I think it is not a conclusion, I find it very interesting to have an opening on the link between mobility and acknowledgement of skills and operationally. And we are going to work more specifically with Morocco on the pharmaceutical sector with the setting up of a new sectorial center. Furthermore, we're going to work regionally, and I mentioned the regional program for the Mediterranean in link with the European Union and the various countries to support each of the country of the area in a common program on mobility and training. That's going to be a different moment beyond your reflections, and where we can meet again and talk about that common programmation of the countries of the Mediterranean area. To conclude, and there again, it's not really a conclusions, but it's to make an appointment for next step. I talked about JOGS facility before, which is a facility with finance in Turin from the 14th to the 17th of June this year. We're going to organize a workshop which will bring together the various stakeholders of the social dialogue in Morocco around such analysis of the Moroccan system for employment and training, and analysis around each of the functions you mentioned earlier, governance, information. So it is something which I think is it is important for the participants to understand what works and what doesn't work, and also to see that the core of a sustainable system, which is acknowledgement, knowing and acknowledging the skills, the workshop will make it possible to stress this system as it is today, and also to identify different ways for the future. And we hope to carry on working with the Moroccan government, with you, with Morocco and other countries, and we hope to work with you at the regional level. Thank you for this opportunity given to us today. We share this with you. Now, I've just had communication for Mr. Marcini and Evan Martin. Lead we cannot hear you. If you want, I can answer and give my last words. The answer is very easy. I think it is related to the issue mentioned by Madame Marcassini. It's a question of political priority and internationalization of higher education and vocational training, and also human capital. Unfortunately, today, we are not in the framework of political priorities of such countries, putting forward human capital before other roads. In practice, at least, this is all the interest. If there's political priority, we will have the means and political mobilization, and so we have to find progress, not solution. It is not from one day to another that universities are going to become international and develop a nexus, which is a link between the job market and mobility. It is a social ladder in the development, and there are several steps, and we have to step on them one after the other. It's a long process, not solutions can be found from one day to another. I conclude with three quick points. And for the fourth presentation, Madame Marcassini insisted on the potential of internationalization of domestic universities at home, and also we have to explore and test modalities of migration at home. I mean, virtual mobility, virtual migration, working on platforms, nomadic work, and other modalities, which are just emerging, but have not yet integrated useful box of migratory policies and capacity building. The first question is, there's a parallel between domestic internalization and virtual mobility of work. The second question, I think it is very important to find links between the three perspectives that I identified in our four presentations, the links between mobility and vocational training or higher education. And on the other hand, the links between job market and system of vocational training, which was at the center of L'Arabie presentation, and also ensuring for the countries of the south of the Mediterranean or Northern African countries an interaction between skills and mobility, which should not be a problem for the development. And this is why I call to develop such strategies for migration and skill. And the third and last point, I think that we need more such national strategy in the Northern African countries. There are not enough cohesion between and holistic strategies to integrate the questions of skills and migration in the national strategies of vocational training and unemployment. And those strategies in Europe and in the regions. The question we are thinking of requires an approach which goes beyond bilateral approaches between the two countries. It requires a regional, sub-regional approach. I worked a lot on the Euro-Mediterranean approach, but I think that the data shown by Madame Marcassini on the internationalization levels at the universities and in the countries at the east of the Mediterranean, southeast of the Mediterranean, and the Maghreb countries shows that we are in front of very different realities. Can we just put this in a policy, in one single policy? I don't think so, but maybe we have to invest more in the development of this regional approach, which can be between Europe and Africa. Thank you, and Africa. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Evan Martin. I give the floor to Madame Marcassini. Thank you very much. First, I'm going to try to add to the answer, and I agree with what has been said by Mr. Martin. It is a matter of political priority, first and foremost, to try and implement internationalization policy, which can be more efficient and affect the biggest number. But I think that behind such challenges, there are often a lot of opportunities. So we just have to grab them and see the better side of it. COVID, for instance, is a challenge which just surprised us all at the same time, in the same way, and according to the sectors and the countries. But nevertheless, nobody was thinking of that. And the COVID, for instance, as I can try and present it, can be an opportunity for this specific subject of internalization in this area, because there's more will, there's more facility, we can see more value addition to invest in internalization activities, which are different from physical mobility, which is essential nevertheless, but it's not the only one. if we want to look at the benefit, to affect the biggest number quickly and catch up for this region. Domestic internalization is important, and knowledge investment has to be invested in. And so this is important. And it is a very rich area which started its tradition with universities and travels and knowledge dissemination, which is more important than anywhere else. So there's quite a lot to be done. This region managed to do that, and was the best at the point in history. So now today we have to deal with that. We believe in that, and I think we're not the only ones. And we just have to work on that and work together. To conclude, I have nothing much to add, but I just want to go back on the word opportunity, because it is essential in this type of exchanges. We have to be opportunistic and seize the opportunity, because the young people are there and they are the rich human capital. We have to act now, and this has to become the engine to go forward. And then in the post-secondary, whether we're talking about education and everything else, so there's quite a lot of things, because and to get even richer, we have to invest even more in human capital, and this is our challenge. And when it comes to mobility, we really need a new dialectics, which is more inclusive and enables, as we did today, to put together a mobility education skill and to have a win-win situation. We started working on that, and we're not going to stop here, and we hope to carry on with all that regionally. And I think we all agree at which level regionally we can discuss that, but we have to put an end to stricter sentence bilateral, and we have to work together. And common programmation, which was mentioned by the representative of the AFD, is an opportunity, and we want to go all along, and I think we all agree. And thank you all for this wealth, and thank you for the Policy Center for their help, contribution, and everything they did for this webinar, which is a second success. And thank you also for the IFBS, which joined us today. We're working together, and I hope we'll agree on the same level. Thank you for the whole team of the CMI, which contributed to preparing this webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Jaidi, for your last words and recommendation. I am aligned with all the exchanges we had. And I want to stress maybe two essential points: the new opportunities in this somewhat complex environment, as was said by Madame Marchesini, the issue of opportunity, because today all the countries in the south and also the countries of the north of the Mediterranean face the same challenges when it comes to training and education, and the link between skill and education. All the countries are in the same situation, and they want to build better foundations for their education systems and teaching systems. We have a certain amount of challenges. You mentioned COVID with its impact and how we live, and how we should envisage a new production system, and our commitments in society. And there's also the issue of the acceleration of carbon transition, which is very much in the news in Europe, but also beyond Europe, on the relation between Europe and South in the most advanced sectors of industry and agriculture. And the big issue of biodiversity in the Mediterranean, which is important since it is fundamentally linked to the degradation of our natural environment. And we need to preserve this natural and ecosystems in the Mediterranean. Then we also have the issue of human health through not only what we can see in the evolution of pharmaceutical production and the future of the pharmaceutical industry in our region, and also environmental health related to the issue of water management or air management or sewage. Those are common challenges, and such challenges cannot be taken on their common goods. So we cannot deal with them at the level of one country. Whatever the development of the country or the choices made for its future development, we are in a logic which is necessary nationalization, regionalization, even if the South finds it difficult to talk in one voice or with all its components. In the Maghreb, for instance, our Euro-Mediterranean project wants to keep its performance and identity, and thinking together on those common challenges, and also on the impact of such common challenges on our training systems. And at the same time, capacity buildings, human resources, and especially maintaining this fundamental project, which is the human element and aspiration to collective well-being and mobility. I think we share those principles. And after the discussion we've had today, I said that the experience mentioned by the representative of the AFD on Leonardo da Vinci, that should be thought about not I wouldn't say African level, but I would say in the Maghreb or in the Mediterranean. There's quite a lot of there are quite a lot of lessons to be learned from what was done in Europe and what can be developed in Maghreb, whatever the difficulty today. The difficulties known by Maghreb and South-South mobility. The same happens to practical experiences presented by Mr. Alexander and the involvement to mobilize a certain amount of resources and funds to deploy them at the level of the Maghreb countries. It's very interesting. In the same way, the theme on the future of the university, of our universities, the type of teaching, the vehicle of teaching, the contents of teaching, but at the same time, all the modalities of the academic teaching, whether remotely or the cooperation or collaboration between the various universities in the north and the south of the Mediterranean. This seems to be a very fertile axis and a very important one. Of course, there are cooperation policies with the Maghreb universities, but this is a long-term vision, but we need support, and we have to start the debate of where we stand today and where the universities are on that, both banks of the Mediterranean and how we can bring them together when it comes to pedagogical capacities, the exchange of professors and so on. Those are the two dimensions which I kept from these exchanges. The experience of Leonardo da Vinci and the internationalization or regionalization of the cooperation between the universities. And from those two terms, we can define new meetings to go a little bit deeper into this aspect of such issues. And there's still a long road, through our experience and the resources we mobilize and also the dialogue we have amongst us, we have a certain logic of proposals for the decision makers to anticipate the future more. Those are the conclusions I want to make, and I want to thank the IFT for this very useful aspect, and also the capacities and to support a certain amount of projects, motivated stakeholders, and also our friends from the Centre Méditerranéen for the integration. And I think this is a link in the Maghreb today, which can establish more open relations in the world of common knowledge and common reflections with similar centers in Tunisia and Algeria, and maybe further in Egypt and elsewhere. So keep this perspective, and let's go to work and collaborations to attract other people and create this sedimentation around this fundamental problematic for the future of both banks of the Mediterranean. Thank you very much, Professor Jaiti. This webinar is closing. I would like to thank all the panelists, Madame Marcaccini, Mr. Bertrand-Dumacher, Mr. Martin, Mr. Jaiti, for your efforts and for your contributions, hoping to organize a third round of dialogue. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.